All right. My name's Ramirez. This is FrogBear. Um, Today's topic, what did I even call it? I don't even remember what I called the stream. When life avoids the real answers. Okay. Yeah, when life avoids the real answers. Why did I name it this? Trauma. Yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah, I heard something very interesting not that long ago where somebody was bringing up the fact that for hundreds of years, right? For hundreds and thousands of years, right? Without the idea of without the concept of modern science, whatever you want to call that, no, modern psychology, we'll say that. Um, this person brought up the fact that, like, why is our generation far so much traumatized? Why do they experience, like, why do they develop disorders, right, from trauma when for hundreds of years, um, other people did not experience the same? And I think it's because it was classified. There are aspects of it, right? Um, One of them is that some people with psychological disorders will not display them. Usually, people will assume that they're just quirks that certain people have. So back in the day, I really do think that you couldn't tell because when you would ask, I'm pretty sure that you would figure out that the drunkard, town drunkard, was probably somebody who suffered some traumatic past, and that's why he was a drunkard. Um, why certain women turn to prostitution, why other men would give up their lives and turn to beggars, or you know what I mean? Like I think not to diminish the statement in saying why are people so much more traumatized and so much more in disorder now than back then, but back then there was a tightly knit community, right? It's not like one person couldn't speak to another person. We could look at old Nordic traditions for an example. And it was like during winter they would have a festival where they would all drink together, and where if any of them felt that they had done wrong to one of their tribesmen, they would go out of their way to apologize, only to figure out that the other person didn't perceive it that way, right? But it was an exercise in expressing oneself, is kind of what I'm getting to. Um, so the reason why I'm bringing all this up, or the reason why her saying that sparked off my idea, was because what I think trauma is, right? Because I actually really thought about it. Like, what is trauma? Why does somebody experience a backlash from something they experience in life? And I think, not to trivialize it, but I think what tends to happen is the individual, the kid, the person who's the victim in this case, has an expectation of life. Sorry if you can hear the sirens. Has an expectation of life. That life or those requirements or the way that situation played out was not the way they were supposed to see it, right? In experiencing violent trauma, in experiencing sexual trauma, in experiencing whatever sort of experience that would like clash with the reality that you're perceiving, right? So I'm generalizing it hella hard, but I think trauma is born when people experiencing when people experience something outside of their normal parameters, their normal view of life. And when that happens, there are a few different coping mechanisms that tend to develop where a coping mechanism is just that thing that will arise in whatever circumstance to prevent that individual um, from thinking any further. That would, how do I say this? It's like, you're avoiding the big elephant in the room sort of situation, right? Where the individual themselves will either erase certain memories or forget certain experiences or develop certain avoidant behaviors to avoid that triggering experience. There's a variety of different things that the mind can do, especially the younger you are. Um, it's usually where most repressed memories come from when you're a child. But right. So the stream was called "When Life Avoids the Real Answers," And right, to some degree, these things can turn even worse when the individual, right, because you can even traumatize yourself without realizing it. um, right, you could gaslight yourself. You can experience something in life and gaslight yourself through the whole experience in order to change the perception of what you're experiencing at that moment, because there's no reason. Right, so for this is a weird example, but this sister hates me and I don't like her very much either, so who cares. But she experienced a different side of dad that I never got to see, right? Well, I didn't even get to live with that, so there was that whole thing too. But beyond that, she experienced a very violent side of dad. But if you were to ask her that today or when she was 18 or when she was younger, right? Because I spoke to my older sister about this. She was the only one around at the time. So this is the second oldest, right? I have four sisters. The oldest is the one I spoke to about the second oldest. And I asked her what was she like when she was growing up. And she told me she saw dad as like a hero, as somebody who could do no wrong, right? And I was just like, for real. Like, did she get to see what you got to live through? And she's all like, yeah, she saw me. She sometimes saw me come out of the room all bloodied, this and that. But and I'd be like, and she would still see dad as the hero, right? Like, what the fuck? But this is just an example. So even to this day, right? Even in old age, even when she's older, you can't bring up certain topics. She'll start crying. She'll start throwing fits. Very bad. But it comes down to the notion of understanding that this whole trauma factor is a very interesting thing. Some people experience it not of their free will, right? They're just in the circumstance. But other people will gaslight themselves. Other people will tell themselves internally that what I'm looking at is not what I'm looking at. And that's a whole other level of like, whoa, what did you just do? And this is just, and that's just the internal factor. That's not the external factor that actually worries me the most. And the external factors that worry me the most are from television, movies, um, music videos, music in general. People do not understand that music is one of the pillars of like affirmation, right? And in affirmation, I really do mean like um, people will seek out certain messages in music to affirm states of their reality. And the reason why I kind of bring this up is because I have a song that I'm gonna try to do a song study on, but I'm like hella late on that. Um, yeah, I had weird ass dreams, so I had to stay up and journal them all down because that was weird as fuck. But whatever. Back to this. So all that shit don't matter. All that matters is government tyranny. All I'm thinking is Prodigy right now. But in doing no, not in what is it? What's the last thought that I had in my head? Oh yeah, Empire creation, right? Because that's why I was thinking of Prodigy. When the lie is repeated, right? Then there's the other trauma factor where you don't know, where you were taught something your whole life and you were taught to believe this one aspect of life your whole life, and when you're finally encountered with something that opposes that worldview, it just shatters. Like, you're stuck, right? You get the deer in the headlights effect because it's just like, right? Imagine everybody imagines that unicorns don't exist. Then they just see a flock of them flying through the air, and it's just like, but I was told my whole life that they don't exist, right? Like, I don't know how that would manifest itself, right? Because those circumstances are very few and far in between. Um, but right, yeah. For example, this would be a good example, like government tyranny, when a modern day individual has to figure out that their government has been involved in a variety of different programs where they develop tactics and they're still being used today. Like, imagine the sort of like backlash that the person would get. I don't think they would be able to function at the thought that they couldn't trust their cell phone, that they couldn't trust like any electronic that has a microphone and a camera on it, right? Because oh no, I'm being watched, right? Like, there's that level of trauma where you just never knew. You just never knew for all these years, and when you're finally confronted with it, it's like, oh. And it's very interesting. So what do you call that? Is that trauma? Or right, cuz the emotional turmoil that somebody would experience during these events is what creates what we call trauma, right? So I should say that trauma is an affecting, a thing that's already it's manifested itself, right? PTSD, motor shellings or shell shock is what I think it used to be called. Um, so it's very interesting, the idea and the concept of trauma and how the human body responds to it and how people develop their own ideas about it. Um, Cause I don't know, like I could view now more than ever, right? I've had plenty of car accidents. I've had plenty of not like super serious car accidents, but I've either seen them, I've been in two, or I just remember my traumatic past when I was like younger in middle school when I was riding ATVs, when I was in go-karts, and I just remember all of the dumb shit that I would do on there. And there are at some points when I was younger where I had to tell myself, you either do something about this now, you either do something about this response system that you've developed now, or you're forever going to live like this. I remember having that. This was when I flipped over in a go kart. So I remember that as a kid. And very interesting things. Like some of my most traumatizing experiences, right? Like for real, would be my dreams, dude. My dreams are so vivid. And there's like, sometimes I can't even tell I'm in a dream. That's how much the air around me feels right, like from it's like when you're making, it's like not when you're making a movie, but when you're editing footage and you're trying to make it seem like something, right? You would put background noise of people talking, you would put background noise of the person walking up towards you, you would put background noise, or you would do voiceovers. And even if you do a voiceover of the scene that you're looking at, you would have to then edit the audio so it sounds like it's coming from outside, or it has some real ambiance of, you know what I mean? Like, one thing is me speaking in a garage and another thing is me speaking in an open area. The vocals are different because my voice isn't bouncing off as many objects, and that comes across very differently in terms of sound and aesthetic as a microphone, right? I pay attention to way too much shit is what I'm trying to emphasize here. And like, I guess I could talk about this one. Like, one of my very first dreams when I was a kid was me walking on a ledge. Like, I have a fence ledge, and I was just walking across it. And I just remember having this dream where I fell from it. And I was like, no. It was a really weird ass dream. And funny how I was afraid of heights without knowing that I was afraid of heights. Because I'm fucking deadly afraid of heights. Hell no, dude. I even freak out. Nah, I don't freak out on a plane, but I do my best not to freak out on a plane. Um, no, I don't really freak out. I've seen actual people freak out. Unnerving, whatever you want to call that word. But it, right, like you basically have expectations of what life should be. And then when those expectations don't turn out the way they do, uh, some form of your handling of that event will either create a trauma bond or allow you to move forward with your life. At least, very loose. Again, very generalized statements. Because if you, I don't know. Again, I'm a gestaltist, so the way I want to view the whole world and the whole, like, the way I want to view everybody is like a snowflake. It's like, yes, there are generalities in terms of the formation of the ice, but there's key differences. Either way, what's my time on this? I did 15 minutes on trauma talk. I don't know what else I could say about trauma. Because the idea that came to me about when right was me talking about how I listened to this chick basically say that why do we have more trauma now, even though in the past people went through more gruesome shit. Oh yeah, I should finish this. It's because they don't know. Like they never the people who were experiencing the trauma in the past were not aware of the effects that the mental psyche went through. So I'd imagine that because life was the way it was back then, um, the at least the individual minds in those time periods, their brain or the how they would look at life was much more coarse, which was much more rough because they knew that their circumstances weren't as leisurely as our circumstances. So they had to worry for a lot more, and they were a much more tighter knitter community. So me personally, I wouldn't be one to assume that the son didn't actually have a meaningful conversation with their father about how, yo, dad, like I'm experiencing this really weird shakiness when I confront this thing that I'm scared of, right? And I'd imagine that they would have their own internal way of describing what that was in order to help his son move past that. Um, and because now more than ever we have statistics in the sense that we catalog, categorize, and log all of the things that kind of happen. I think it adds to the effect of us seeing much more instances of this arise. So it's not to say that in the past there weren't any traumas. You could look at some the stories of certain kings and their children, and tell you a different story. But I again, it's why I say it the way I say it, which is it's when that individual's life expectations don't turn out the way they do, um, and it develops this sort of backlash system because they expected life to turn out this way, but instead it turned on this way, and causing that individual to have a dual perception or a loss of faith, or it manifests in a variety of different ways. But bringing that up, how we just have more statistics, we have more ability to catalog it. Not only that, we also have we have a stupid ass culture that tends to glorify aspects of trauma, and it doesn't really, and instead of addressing the issue as it should be, people are just kind of told that like, oh no, you're okay, like you shouldn't really be thinking about that. And I always found that very weird. Aspects of it do get glorified, and they're told, "Oh no, you're amazing for the way you are. You should continue doing this, and you should continue spazzing out in public." And usually, these comes from like Tumblr. This comes from that really soft iteration of people that currently exist today. Um, right, very soft, allowing for very malleable experiences, which will then leave them completely changed at the end of their experience. By malleable, I mean that these people, you could just manipulate them to do anything. Right? If all they have to do is watch something on the television in order for them to believe it, well, you know exactly where their consciousness lies. It's why one of my most powerful things that was taught to me was don't trust me. Look for it yourself. And I'm super guilty of that nowadays. When people want to argue with me and be like, well, XYZ, this is why you're wrong. And I'm like, well, look into it. Like, I clearly, nothing I could say will change my mind, but maybe if you hear it from a different face, from a different voice, right, from somebody of your complexion, you would probably believe it then. And statistically speaking, they probably would, because that's how much drone programming people tend to have. That they could I could write I've been saying all of the things that I've been saying since 2018, but people do not want to hear it from my face, and they don't want to hear it with my voice. They would much rather hear it from whatever white face is their favorite, from whatever black, Asian, whatever race these people identify with the most. They'd rather listen to it the exact same words that I'm saying, but from a different face. And why that is, I don't know. People just have these weird views of expectations of life, and when it doesn't meet them, right? They act out a different programming. I still remember to this day where I remember suggesting an idea and everybody ignoring me, right? Everybody was like, oh, yeah, whatever. But the other motherfucker in the call, dude, says the exact same thing I said. The exact same words. In the exact same order. But when he said it, everybody was like, yeah. And I'm like, am I fucking speaking Roman? Am I speaking Greek? Like, I don't know. That's a whole other topic, but I don't know. People tend to be traumatized and they don't realize it, let alone have the ability to quantify it. So, this was a discussion on trauma and how I think it tends to develop. And hopefully we can keep on moving in a free world, quote unquote free world. Either way. My name is Ramirez.